Welcome to I Hate It Here, the podcast for HR and people professionals, making the hardest job in the world just a little bit easier. I'm Hebba Youssef.
You have to have a real passion for doing this work, and you have to have a real commitment and maybe even a real calling to do this kind of work because it's difficult. You can sense tension and you can see when it's not present, and you can see when people are enjoying working with each other and enjoying their jobs. Are you providing that kind of experience? Are you creating that environment that's providing that experience? Because there are external factors. Sometimes there's lack of support. Sometimes there's lack of resources. But then there are the things that we do or don't do. We're getting involved in people's lives and in people's mental health in ways that were unthinkable when I started my career. All of the changes, all of the social issues we've gone through over the past few years, but way back at the beginning of my career, would have completely ignored it. Having conversations and not ignoring things is one of the biggest shifts. It's a hard shift, but it's one of the biggest shifts that I've tried to make.
Welcome back to another episode of the I Hate It Here podcast, all about workplace cultures. I'm your host, Hebba Youssef, and joining me today is Tracie Sponenberg. Tracie, welcome.
Hi, Hebba. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm so pumped. I say I'm so pumped every episode for those listening.
Yeah, but especially now, especially today.
I'm stoked, Tracie, to talk to you. I love talking to you. Tracie, fun fact, Tracie and I met for the first time last week in person. So we built a rapport then. We were already online friends, but I love when online friends become real life friends. But Tracie, for those that don't know you, can you share a little bit about who you are and what you've done historically in HR?
So historically, I've been in HR for 175 years. It feels like, it feels like 1,000 or the rest of you. So I think one of those unusual people that knew, one of those weird people that knew in high school, this is what I wanted to do. So I've been working in the world of people, in the world of HR for almost 30 years. And I'm currently the chief people officer of a company called the Granite Group. And we're a wholesale distributor based in the Northeast of the US.
Love it. We're going to get to this high school aspiration of HR. But before we get there, I ask every single guest at the beginning, every single episode, what is your one HR hot take?
One of the things, and I like to speak a lot from my own experience because I'm still nervous about presuming hey, you should do this and you should do that, or telling people, because what works for me may not work for someone else. But through the lens of my own experience, I would say my hot take is look deep inside yourself. So I've done a number of things over the years and felt very stuck earlier in my career, in my work and in my life. And I looked externally, or I should say I blamed things externally. And certainly that does happen sometimes. Those external factors, there's a lot of them. But I had everything I needed to do the things that I wanted to do within me. And I just didn't tap into those until really my mid-40s. So look internally. I think it's the hot take.
That's a brilliant hot take. People try to give advice all the time about all the different things and parts of HR, but I love that you approached it from everything you need is really inside you already.
Yeah.
You just got to remember that. I think I noticed a major shift in my career when I stopped worrying so much about being uncomfortable and more so decided if I'm uncomfortable, it's because we're doing something that's really hard and really impactful. And I just need to sit in that uncomfortable feeling and get really comfortable at it. So it's a long way of saying I've been there with you. Internal self-talk. I listen to it whenever I tell myself something oh, I can't do this, or I might not be good at this. I always ask myself, who told you that? And if the answer is me, then I stop again and say, okay, well, that's just something I made up. I can definitely do this. So self-talk is very interesting. And there's a lot about limiting beliefs out there that I love talking about. But for today's episode, I don't want to get too sidetracked because I can talk about it forever. I want to talk a little bit about that 30-year career you've had in HR. You said in high school, you knew you wanted to do HR. So what motivated you to pursue this career?
So everybody has some sort of, not everyone, but most people have some sort of early mentor. And I had an aunt that worked in personnel. That's what we called it at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, right? Personnel in the law firm. And I was close with her. I spent a lot of time with her. And what I learned from her was what she did really sort of combined business and people and strategy, and certainly looked a lot different than it does today. And I think maybe it looks much the same in a law firm now as it did back in the 80s and 90s. But I studied psychology. That was my undergraduate degree, was in psychology. I had a keen interest in that. I had a strong interest in business, and I had a strong interest in people, and more from the lens of like, what makes people tick and how can I figure that out and how can I help a business tap into that? So that was like many years ago, but that's carried through my career, and I never left. I had opportunities to leave and do other things and run companies, but just felt like this is what I love and what I'm good at.
That's beautiful. It took me a while to figure out that people was what I was really good at. Like it came so naturally that I was off pursuing other things and I didn't even realize I had a real passion for people. How has your passion for HR evolved over the years?
Well, I lost it for a little while over the past few years, for sure. Like it just went in the toilet. Yeah. But, I grew up in a world where HR was personnel and where it was compliance and where it was, do your performance reviews on time or else. And it was hiring and firing. And there's still aspects of those things. But from there to now, it's just such a drastic difference. I also made an unusual shift. I learned very early on. I started my career in college. So I was an intern before then in a 1,200 person facility for UPS. So I worked in a very large global company and learned pretty quickly, like, I don't want to do that. Like I wanted to move home or close to home. I was working in a different state and they just couldn't make it work. And I am glad in a way because it allowed me to get out of my comfort zone and apply for a job as a department of one and also running HR for a newspaper and publishing company in my home state where I wanted to be, and something that I felt like super underqualified for and had major imposter syndrome about for a long time. But I did everything and I learned everything. And so I really believe like every experience, even the bad ones, got me to here. Like every experience I took something from, even the ones that were really hard, even the ones that I didn't enjoy as much, would not change a thing about my career.
I feel the same way. I feel like all the bad stuff just gets you to the good stuff. And then sometimes I look back and I think about the several paths my career could have taken. And I just know that I'm really happy where I am today and that every single shitty employer got me one step closer to the job I have today, which is working with some of the best people I know. So
good. I can swear. So that's good. I'm like curbing what I say.
Like this podcast is called I Hate It Here. You think I censor people from saying
I know that, but no, yeah. Okay.
So you've been in HR for 30 years. I am still in awe because I'm like a decade in. I'm like, I'm over it already sometimes. But what are some key inflection points that have happened for you during that time?
Yeah. And so I talk a lot about being in it for 30 years and 51. I talk a lot about that too, because I'm more innovative and connected to the world of work and the work that I do and to our people than I've ever been in my entire career. And that came with age, that came with experience for me. Some people get that early on. I definitely didn't. I was a, good little person doing exactly what the company told me to do for many, many, many years. So my first job, my global career at UPS, my 5-year global career, I had a woman that I worked for that I've worked in male-dominated industries for most of my life. It just kind of happened that way. And I love the distribution and transportation aspect of these roles in terms of the makeup of the company. And so my first supervisor at UPS was a woman. I watched her navigate the complexities of being a woman, or the only woman on the leadership team in HR at the time, and certainly the only Black woman, and watching her navigate that with grace and with grit. And she was an excellent role model for me. She also did something that at the time I thought was so awful, but ended up being like the first real turning point in my career. And there was somebody that I just couldn't stand, just hated him on the team. And he was very rogue, something I embrace now. He didn't follow the rules, and I embrace that now, but I was very much a rule follower. I was very much a box checker, and she knew that I couldn't stand him, so she had me report to him, and I left and I cried And I came back. I just left and got gas and came back and was like, okay, I guess I have to do this. And it ended up being such a formative moment in my career because I learned, I didn't die. I was okay. And I learned. And I learned from somebody who was not only very different from me, but who approached things in a very different way. So I learned and I grew. And then there's been a lot, but the second biggest one was a woman in my last company that was on my team. And she came to me one day and said, I have a problem and it's you, and gave me the most horrible, most wonderful gift of feedback. And we talked it through, and I was not giving her what she needed as a leader. And she changed how I lead. And I'm still working on it. But she helped change. She helped me see myself through her eyes and helped me change how I led.
Oh, that's hard, but also beautiful, having somebody who cares enough about you to tell you something really difficult. And then also the way you gracefully accepted that feedback. I mean, we all think we're like perfect, right? And then you get feedback and you're like, oh, I'm not. I mean, like,
I say it was gracefully accepted, but
you definitely screamed. Yeah. No. We've all been there.
It then. I do now, though.
Yeah. I feel like that's so funny because in the moment, whenever I get hard feedback, I'm always like, my internal talk is like me screaming. I'm like, no, that's not true. You're wrong. I'm right. And then I go and like sit with it. And lately I've gotten really good at saying like, when I get feedback that's hard, I'll say like, I think I'm going to have an emotional reaction to this if I say something right now. So what I think is best is I'm just going to process this. And then I want us to talk about it in 2 to 3 days. Because then I know I will have calmed down enough. But my first reaction, despite all these years of training people on how to accept feedback, how to give it, I still have that reaction right away of like defensiveness. And I just have to remind myself to work through it. It's tough. I love that she wanted to share that with you. So how has the HR landscape itself changed during your career? I heard you say like in the beginning, you were the rule follower. I think a lot of people in HR we're like a heavily regulated space.
Yeah.
There are laws. We have to abide by them. So I feel like a lot of us are somewhat rule followers who then become rule breakers. So how has the HR landscape changed during your career? Like, what are some big shifts you've witnessed?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a great way to put it. And that's definitely me. And I still have to fight that kind of rule follower in me because compliance is a part, right? But you don't lead with compliance, you lead with humanity now. And I think that that's what I was missing early in my career. And, earlier in my career, it was all about, I came into a world of safety and regulations and compliance and transportation and trucking, and that was heavily, heavily, heavily regulated. And I was taught how to do 3-minute interviews and how to make a decision in 3 minutes on the course of somebody's career. And so that I got very good at that, but which is a terrible thing to be good at. But I really was passionate about the work I did, but dispassionate about the employee experience. And that carried through and through, terminations and decisions. I always thought like, okay, it's the right thing for the business. And, those termination meetings where somebody's there with a box and where you don't let anybody speak. And I'm talking early in my career. And it really led like that. Like my job was hiring and firing, and my job was making people sign forms and telling on them when they didn't sign forms. And they're Right. And so a lot of that. And then through like lots of things, including that situation with changing how I led and took a deep look at myself over a period of time and wasn't fully till I got at the Granite Group and saw and worked for a CEO who was really people first, and that the way like you could see the culture walking in, you could just see I want to say total relaxation, but you can sense tension and you can see when it's not present, and you can see when people are enjoying working with each other and enjoying their jobs. And that's when I really changed. I'm still changing and really tried to embrace that people first mindset, which sounds like a cliche, but it's not. And really try to change myself. And with that came getting bolder and braver and having tough conversations and standing up to the CEO and telling him when he's wrong and talking to people about difficult things and all of the all of the changes, all of the social issues we've gone through over the past few years, but way back at the beginning of my career, would have completely ignored. I mean, that would have been expected by people within the company and in the company as well. And I think having conversations and not ignoring things is one of the biggest shifts. It's a hard shift, but it's one of the biggest shifts that I've tried to make.
I mean, I've even witnessed it in the last 10 years. Like when I started, there are things we never talked about. What's that phrase? Like you never talk about like sex, drugs, and rock and roll at work.
Yeah.
Now I just feel like, I mean, I hope people aren't talking about the first one or the second one, but like, up to you, whatever, your life, your choices. But I do feel like there's been a major shift. And I don't know if the 2020, the pandemic, the George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor's murder, like, I don't know if those made it even more important to have the conversations at work, because it still felt up until even then that there were some things you could say at work, but you had to be careful. But then that summer of 2020, I feel like it was no holds bar. Everyone could say exactly how they were feeling, and they were calling people out.
Yes, they were a catalyst for sure. And I think in combination with, I don't love grouping people into generations, but I'm going to do it in this case. I have 3 kids who are Gen Z kids, right? So young people, either in the workforce or soon to be in the workforce. They're not just expecting, they're demanding things from their employers. They're demanding change. They're demanding speaking out on social issues, and they're demanding some type of work-life blending that works for them. They're not going to work 70, 80 hours a week like, I did. And that they're changing us. Like I'm Gen X. They're changing what work looks like. And I think companies aren't quite ready. I know we're struggling with that a bit in areas, but great. Like I'm totally here for it. It's really, really wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, like I entered the workplace at the height of like the girl boss hustle culture mindset, where it was like, you got to hustle, you got to get that promotion, you got to be a manager, you got to make that money. And it was like, you got to give up everything to get there. And I really feel like with the introduction to Gen Z in the workplace, I've also began to question my own behavior and my own assumptions. And I feel like they've made me, I know a lot of people will complain about Gen Z in the workplace. I feel like they've made me more conscious of like my bad behavior. Yeah. In a very nice and mindful way. And I'm also like creating things and experiences for other employees. So not only have they made me mindful of like my traumatic bad behavior, I also then am better able to be a good chief people officer to the people at work week, because I also want them to have a better experience than potentially the experience I had.
Yeah. And you're going to fight for it. And I'm going to fight for that. And you're going to raise your voice, and you're going to get uncomfortable and make sure that happens.
Yeah. I don't know. Any Gen Z people listening, greatly, deeply appreciate all of you. Like it has really, hustle culture was so toxic, and the girl bossing was also very toxic. And I always joke that I'm like a recovering type A. Like I have to remind myself that I don't have to act like this all the time. So it's pretty cool. We touched on this lightly, but I always joke that HR is like the real life Olivia Pope. If you ever watch Scandal, I love Kerry Washington. I just saw her book tour, but I also love Olivia Pope. We're like a real life crisis management team sometimes, HR, like because the world outside often impacts the world at work. And so what experience have you had throughout this beautiful 30-year career where you've had to deal with crisis management during times of like natural disasters, like PR crises, what's happening in the world right now? What is HR's role in all of this?
So I think we're the people that the company looks to when nobody knows what to do. And I think we've seen that. I've seen that throughout my career in different parts, but it became very, very acute during COVID, which was something that people hadn't seen in our lifetime. I mean, the very, very old had experienced maybe the last pandemic, but wouldn't remember that, right? But essentially nobody had experienced that. And so we didn't know what to do. And so we leaned on each other. And that's when community became, I really embraced community, which is so, so important to me now, so critical to me doing the work I do and living my life, just in general, having that. And so I think, I've seen very early in my career, I went through a strike with UPS. So I experienced like what it was like to cross a picket line, which sucks, and I'm not sure I would do now. But back then when I'm, 23, 24, and, have people shake your car and try to pierce your tires and follow you and, going through that, like dangerous work, because it was dangerous, and ultimately carrying the company through, and kind of trying to stay connected to the customers, and having people hate you and throw things at you, and to like what it was like in 9/11, and just the collective grief that the entire organization felt, and trying to figure out how to support that, to, you know, the way we approach things over the past few years, and more conversation based, and equipping our managers with the tools, because we're so widely dispersed, with the tools to have conversations, and with the support that, you know, we have both the EAP, but we also have like a external peer plus type of program called Life Guides, where people can like walk through issues, and people who've been through it, and, you know, trying to figure out, be that connector, I guess. We're not therapists, right? But we are resource providers. So we do have a responsibility to connect people to resources. And I feel like that's been such a huge change. It used to be early in my career, well, whatever, here's the EAP, go away. And I can't talk to you about that because I can't, you know, listen to you, or like, come here, tell me everything. Like, I think there were two types of people like that in HR. So, you know, that's been such a huge change. And the talking about things in the workplace has been a huge change.
It's very interesting that we like talk about things more. And during COVID too, I had to tell people, like, people would come to me for HR advice, and I'd be like, hi, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm your HR professional. Like, this really feels like something you should talk about with your therapist. Because I feel like HR takes on a lot of emotional burden that I'm not sure anyone really understands. How
Nobody does.
Our level of burnout is so high, not because we're doing more than we've ever done before, but it's also because we have this aspect that I don't think any other leader really has to deal with, of the emotional burden of everyone in your organization.
Yeah. And I burned out badly after, like, it was after COVID, like after the worst of COVID, because we took it all on. I
just remember like 12, 14-hour days, like working till the night, like you're at home, you didn't have anything to do. And suddenly you became like the disease control expert. Like, I'm over here Googling, like, how does COVID spread? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we knew nothing at the very beginning, but a lot of it does get thrusted upon us, which the interesting part about like crisis management and like PR is a lot of HR people are tasked with writing like internal statements, which I remember when like internal comms makes sense to be part of HR's function. But I always think that there should be like potentially a external marketer or someone who's like a professional in comms. And I am not a professional in comms. I've just gotten really good at writing them. But I just like, that's also fascinating too. Like, how often in your career, when you started in HR, was HR still responsible for all internal comms, or were you looking externally in the organization to help you do internal?
Yeah. And I've never worked in a place that had an internal comms department. I've worked in places that had marketing, and I've sort of always approached it like a collaboration. But like currently, I guess I would say I directed it, and then in collaboration with marketing, who does have the expertise and the way with words. But like the beginning of COVID, one of the things we talked about, and we met every day, 7 days a week for a while, part of the executive team, the kind of core, because we're an in-person business. So we had 40 plus locations at that time. We have over 60 now. So, and essential business. So we never stopped for a day. So we had masks sewn. It was all kinds of stuff. But the most important thing we did was get our CEO. And in the beginning, it was every day on video, recording a message to send to our people. So we opened that up like to two-way communications on many occasions. And people would email him. But it was so important for people who were scared to death and coming to work every day just to serve the customers, you know, sometimes behind closed doors, that they could hear a message of support from the CEO or a message of that was tough, like something tough that we had to pass on. But every day for, I think, 3 months. And then we went to weekly for the remainder of the year. And then we kind of went to monthly from there.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's funny because sometimes people think like HR should be the person who sends that message. And I'm always like, no, it is the CEO of this company. That should be the person who gives this message. Like, it doesn't help them to hear from me. Like, I'm their HR person. Like, they already hear from me constantly. They need to hear from another leader. That's beautiful that you all did it. Do you still do it to this day? Like, you said once a month now?
About once a month. So it's like a kind of a mini, not state of the company. We actually, some members of our executive team go to every location every quarter and do like downloads. And then we do listening tours with town halls. And so it's about once a month, sometimes more frequent, and that's passing on. And those, the hit rate on those, because everybody will watch a video, is like 75% at least of our people open it, at least, maybe higher. So it was, you get the CEO and he's beloved, you get him sending out a message, then that's the way to communicate it.
So many people are awkward on film. Like even I still struggle to like do a film message
video.
I keep on trying to make a TikTok. I'm like, maybe someday, I could be a TikTok star. No. I don't think that's in the cards for me, to be honest. So.
Same. I do not like being on video. He's great at it. And he's like one take Bill. Never does more than one take.
Wow.
Yeah.
I always have to stop myself in the middle of recording anything. So I'm like, oops, shouldn't have said that. Oops, need to fix that. Oops, I messed it up. That's pretty interesting. Internal comms has just been, it's been the focus of a lot of my thinking recently as we continue to end up in really hard situations in the world, and making sure your employees feel supported, I think, is also a change I've witnessed in the last few years, where almost everything that happens in the world, I now think through an employee lens, where I'm like, oh God, this thing is happening. We're going to have to say something. Our employees need to know we support them, because there isn't this like break anymore.
It's so tough. And so as we scale, and we've more than doubled in size. So we were like 250 people. We're over 700 now. And so in the time that I've been here, and we were like 25 locations, we're over 60. And we're trying to keep that smaller company feel and keep that culture while we're growing. I knew pretty much everybody's name when I started. I don't now. There's locations I haven't been to. And the comms, and that's something we always struggle with. The video works well with the CEO, but if you in this now sent a CEO sent out a message every day or even every week, it would get tuned out. It was needed back then. So we really try to figure out like, what do our people need and how, and do a combination of things that may work, like QR codes. When those came back during COVID, people seem to use those. So we use those. We use home mailings. We use posters. We use video. We use emails. We don't have Slack. We have Slack, but nobody uses it. So.
Oh, that's fascinating. We use Slack too much. I'm like, this needs to be an email. Every time someone Slacks something, I'm like, I cannot read 5 paragraphs right now. Can you email this to me? It's so interesting too, because there was like during the pandemic, do you remember where like all those CEOs had to do layoffs, and then all the layoff videos got leaked? And it was like, then all of a sudden every CEO was like, oh my God, I can't do anything on video. I'm afraid it's going to be leaked. That was just fascinating.
Right. Too. Right. So you have to be really careful. You have to assume that any video or any comms piece that you send out is going to be public. Like I talked about in general to somebody recently, like I live my life like I'm on the Truman Show. Like it's pretty boring. I don't do anything really, but like you're just always on video somewhere, or any email you type could get sent out to someone. So if you live like you've got nothing to hide, then it's a little bit easier when something like that happens. Still not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I just remember watching those videos and being like, where's the HR person telling the CEO not to say these things? I was like, where's your comms person?
I know. I know.
Before we could rant, I can rant about comms. Do you have, I think you've been doing this job for 30 years, and honestly, you discussed your burnout. I've told you I've been burnt out too, but do you have any tips or strategies that folks who are in their early or mid in their careers that want to make it to that 30-year mark, but are just looking at the mountain of work ahead of them and the burnout that all of us are experiencing? Like, how do you manage it all?
I didn't. And so I think if you can figure it out before then, so burnout for me happened, like I realized it, I think probably when I was already being recovered, and or on the way to recovery, it was 2 things. It was my CEO having a conversation with me, like, you're not yourself and you don't seem engaged. And I wasn't. And I was like, I'm surprised it took you this long to notice, because I just didn't give a shit about anything. And then it was me reading an article, and I remember by Jack Kelly, and I was like, oh, because I know I wasn't really depressed, although it kind of felt like that. And I was like, that's what it is. And I didn't recognize it in myself. And like, how the hell was I going to recognize it in other people if I couldn't even recognize it in myself? So a lot of self-care, I don't want to say is bullshit, but you can't tell somebody to meditate or write in a journal and assure them it's going to work for them because it's so unique. What the road to prevention and the road to healing are so unique for each individual. So unique. So it's impossible to say like, hey, this works, this works, this works. So first of all, you have to, if you want a long career, like why? Why do you want to do this work? Can't be because you love people. Like you just don't say, well, I love people. Well,
because you start to hate them after a while. You'll hate them after a while.
Yeah. Certainly it's not all sunshine and roses, right? And the more you move up in your career, if you go up, and you didn't have to move up that proverbial ladder because a progression in a career can look as unique as an individual. But if you do get to a CPO level, it looks less like day-to-day HR and more like the business. And you're doing less of the tactical things in most companies that people really love and embrace when they get into the field. So I think you have to really ask yourself why. And then you have to really embrace your inner badass, and like you really have to get bold and brave, something I was terrible at and some people are innately good at. You have to stand up for your people. And if you can't do that, you might want to reconsider whether a career leading HR at least is for you, right? Because there's lots of different aspects of that. And then at all costs, set your boundaries and protect yourself from burnout, because it sucks and it takes months to recover. And I talk about this a lot because it's really shocking. I have a lot of friends in HR, a lot of friends in the world of HR, a lot of friends leading HR. I am the only friend or only person that I know, there are other people that I know, but only person that did not leave their job over the past 3 years. I don't know. I know of people, but I am not close with anyone that stayed in their job over the past 3 years who was at a CPO or head of HR type of role. And that's shocking. Not shocking to me, I guess, but shocking to people when I tell them that, because it is brutal and it's not going to get any better. So you have to have a real passion for doing this work, and you have to have a real commitment, and maybe even a real like calling to do this kind of work, because it's difficult. And like you said earlier, it doesn't really get acknowledged. And there are certainly jobs that are, the teachers, the doctors, the nurses, the medical professionals of the world are certainly doing things that are more difficult than the work that I do. But within a business, I would say it's the most difficult job that doesn't get acknowledged.
Oh, I say that a lot too. I also just think it's the hardest executive position, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think you have to like constantly advocate and fight for people. It's so hard because it's also sometimes like deeply personal, especially like DEI work. When you are identify from an underrepresented group, then you have to also advocate for all those employees, advocate for equality, advocate for equity, inclusion. And then you also are somebody who's experienced microaggressions, you've experienced discrimination. And so I think there's like a layer to this job that a lot of people really don't understand how deeply hard and draining it can be. And
absolutely. And pay equity on top of that, and doing that through the lens of keeping yourself at a distance from that when that's really, really difficult. And because you see everything and you know everything.
I would say this job is not for the faint of heart. And I also started telling people, like, if you don't like conflict, I'm not entirely sure this is the best job for you, because there's a lot of conflict in our job. You have to like coach people. You have to tell potentially your CEO and your leadership team the things that they do that's incorrect. And a lot of feedback is deeply personal to people. And so if you are afraid to have those hard conversations, I would say work on that first before you decide if this is the path that you want to be on. Because
that's great advice.
Your employees are like relying on you a lot of times. And every time I meet somebody and I tell them I'm in HR, 99% of the time their reaction is, ooh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that doesn't make me feel good.
No.
Everyone listening, like every single one of my friends has a bad experience with HR. And so like with that in mind, I also carry the responsibility of this job so deeply because I don't want to inflict trauma on anyone. That'd be the worst case scenario. So I think that is also an interesting facet of this job, that we carry like an added responsibility to be a better HR team than maybe the ones before that your employees have encountered. And I always feel like we're starting from the negative, where a lot of executive roles are starting from the positive, where it's like we have to combat everything that people think about HR and do our job really well to get them to believe in us.
I think you're right, because, you talk to a new person who comes from a different company, and we try to create a really incredible people experience right from the get-go. And we do, a lot of things to help ensure that. And we hear all the time, wow, this isn't how I was onboarded at my past company, and your team is like so different than, and I love hearing that, but it also makes me sad. And whenever I talk about like transformation to HR professionals, when I talk about like that kind of much older school versus like more modern approach, I say, like, if you're there, you'll hear me say this again, like, ask your friends and family about their HR departments. Like, most people don't do that, but ask, like, because you'll hear it anyway, but ask and find out how many people actually have positive experiences, and then look at your own company and ask your people. And are you providing that kind of experience? Are you creating that environment that's, providing that experience? Because there are external factors. Sometimes there's lack of support. Sometimes there's lack of resources. But then there are the things that we do or don't do. And we can control the things that we do or don't do. The other things we can have influence on, we can't always completely control, but we can all make forward progress. I'm still trying to do it every day.
What are your thoughts on like the future of HR and people? And where do you see the field evolving in the coming years? You've seen some shit.
I've seen some shit. I've seen a lot of shit. And like you always say, nobody predicts a pandemic and nobody predicts these things. And I go back to, the book's probably 3 years old. Lori Rudiman wrote a book. She's great, by the way. She wrote a book on betting on you. It's a lot of stories, career advice, really great. I recommend it to anybody looking for a job or thinking about a career change. And she talked about the future of work being filled with data scientists and psychologists. And although I don't think that that's totally going to happen, that thought isn't wrong. So we're getting involved in people's lives and in people's mental health in ways that were unthinkable when I started my career. We're much more data-driven as a profession. We're still a long way to go, and much more data-driven as a department in my company than we ever were in my career. And, data tells us so much, and it tells a story, and it can help knit things together. So I think parts of that are true. I also see, AI, we haven't mentioned AI, which is like the longest I've talked in months without mentioning the word AI, 45 minutes without AI coming in at all, like is really refreshing, but I'm going to bring it in here. So where we're seeing AI, particularly generative AI, coming in and changing things, which is wonderful and scary at the same time. So I actually I talked about this the other day, and this is scary. This is scary to people like me. I see roles like mine and yours becoming more fractional, becoming more like for two reasons. So becoming more advisory and more external for two reasons. A lot of people are leaving and want to work for themselves. A lot of incredibly talented people leaders have had it with corporate, right? And want to work for themselves. Yeah. And the other thing is AI changing things so much is, parts of our jobs, parts of everybody's jobs will be automated. I'm not saying that companies won't have full-time HR leaders. Don't jump on me there. They will. That will happen. But in smaller, mid-sized companies, I see fractional, not just for HR, but for finance, for marketing. I really do see, our mutual friend Anessa talks about this a lot. I really do see that changing in the next number of years, because you could get a really talented person for a fraction of the amount of money. So, large companies will operate much the same. They'll automate a lot. They'll streamline a lot. I think smaller companies will get smarter about how they use talent. I think we're seeing that in other areas of the business now. And I think we're going to see that in the executive ranks coming up too. And it's not going to look like, well, I work 9 to 5 at a job, 40 hours a week. It's going to be a choose your own adventure type of thing.
Oh, I love a good
for all
choose your own
levels.
adventure.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so.
that's fascinating. I think our job is like so multi. That's what I'm looking for. Not dimensional or not faceted. There's a lot of skills that fall under the umbrella of HR. So like where your sales leader potentially is like really good at selling, closing, negotiation. That is a part of also HR. But on top of that, we also have to be coaches. We have to be therapists to a certain extent. We have to be able to identify bad behaviors in the workplace. Like we have to be able to coach people. We're conflict resolution. So we also manage the biggest part of the budget, headcount. So there are a lot of skills that fall into the HR bucket that are not just HR. Like all of your leaders have their skills. And then I also have all of those skills under my umbrella of skills. And so the fractional direction, I think, does make a lot of sense. Like if you can lean on a talent leader that specifically does this one thing really well versus trying to get an HR leader to do everything really well. Because the reality is, and I'll say it, like I can't do everything really well. I can do a few things really great if I'm just focused on those few things. And so fractional is a very interesting path for a lot of people. I personally also really want a lot of HR leaders to become CEOs. Because I think there's this great article. I got to find it. It made me laugh so hard. I saw it on TikTok. It was like, can AI replace your CEO? And the whole video and the whole article was about how maybe we don't need CEOs. Everything they do, AI could possibly do. And I was like dumbfounded because I was like, wait a minute. Like that's fascinating. My other thought is like maybe a lot of HR leaders with the level of like empathy we have compassion, we have empathy, we have the smarts on how to run the business. We have the biggest budget item as headcount. There's a lot of skills that HR people have that I see is easily transferable to being a CEO and running a business. And we all know like your leaders make or break it. And so to have an HR person become a CEO and be an amazing leader to a company is just a dream I have, that I see more and more HR people saying like, I'm going to be the CEO now. I'm the captain of this ship.
I hope so too. And I talk about our team as being coaches, consultants, and guides. That's what I talk about our team. And that's what I talk about us in HR, right? And so when you think of that, like who better to lead a company to become a CEO than a coach, consultant, guide, guiding the company through something. And that also leaves us and leaves the CEO right for, AI potentially coming in, I guess, and because it's already in coaching and I can't wait to read that. I really want to see that.
And it was like, can AI replace your CEO? And I was like, tell me more. I love my CEO.
Did you send it to your CEO?
I should have. How passive aggressive of me. Like, hey, could you think AI can replace me? No, I love my CEO.
Just hot drop it.
Yeah, I know.
Text it over.
I should. No context whatsoever. Just send it to him and see what he says. That'd be so funny. Okay, Tracie, we like to end every episode with, what is your one HR hill to die on? The thing that you cannot stop talking about that you will never agree to the other side of.
Yeah. So I've tried to be like super, super flexible on this. And I think it's dips into the world of leadership too, because this is so frustrating. And this isn't necessarily a hill. It's a hill in my company. It's a hill in a lot of companies. Like, talk to your damn people. Talk to your, you cannot wait until the end of a year to talk about all the bad shit that happened the 12 months prior. Have conversations with your people all the time. And as we're trying to get better about, making sure that happens and coaching our managers through that. But communication's hard for people, but that's, I guess, so that kind of dips into performance, kind of dips into leadership, but talk to your people. The conflict avoiders, the people who don't do that, but talk to your people. Good things, bad things, everything in between.
That's such a good hill to die on, because the amount of times I have managers come to me and they're like, I think this employee's disengaged. And then I say, well, did you talk to them? And they're like, no. And I'm like, why are you talking to me? Like, you need to go talk to that employee and ask them, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's your career going? Are we investing enough in you? You don't need to talk to me. So I love that. You heard that first here. Go talk to your people. We all say till we're blue in the face, go make them do it. Tracie, thank you so much for being here with me today. For those that want to get in touch with you, how should they find you?
I think I'm the only Tracie Sponenberg on LinkedIn. So at least unless there's a fake one, that's a good place to find me. And you can find me at Tracie Spon, TraciESPON, most other like social medias. But I love to connect with people, learn from people, and I'd love to hear from your listeners. And this has been such a joy, a long time coming, and such a joy. And thank you so much for having me.
I know. I'm so excited. I'm going to see you this weekend. So Tracie and I are going to be at the same conference. So I know 2 conferences in a row we get to see each other. But Tracie, seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I'm so grateful to have you in my network, to have you in my orbit, to learn from you. I've learned so much, and I hope I can make it 30 years in HR. You are my North Star now, because I'm real worried about it.
That's a good thing, buddy.
I'm real worried about my career right now and how I can do all of this. But no, thank you so much. Honestly, the listeners are going to love this. Thanks for tuning in. Keep up with all the latest HR resources by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you love I Hate It Here, tell an HR friend. I'll see you next time.